Bastish here for 64K and welcome to episode 5 of the Zine-Files. And welcome back. So if you've never watched an episode of the Zine-Files before, basically I go through an old retro video game magazine, whether it's an old computer magazine from the 80s or a console one from the 90s, anything old. We go through all the pages, check out all the articles, discuss them, also show a lot of gameplay footage so you can get to see these old games in action. Okay, so today's magazine is going to be Commodore User, the March 1988 issue. So Commodore User was the first computer gaming magazine I ever read. My dad bought me this issue over here. It was the first issue of any computer gaming magazine I ever read. I read this thing back to back for a full month until the next one came out, so I knew it like off by heart, and pretty much every issue was the same deal. I just loved it. So let's not waste any more time and get on with the show. Okay, welcome to Commodore User issue number 54. So let's jump on straight over to this cover. If you look in the top right at the top there, it says number 1 for Amiga games. Now that's pretty interesting. This was the 1988 issue, so these guys got on board with the Amiga, at least for the UK magazines, long before anybody else, at least a couple years before that. The Amiga stuff really started to creep in heavily in the following year, 1989. So up until this point it was still predominantly C64 stuff. By 89 I did notice a massive shift in this magazine. It really became predominantly an Amiga magazine, with the C64 stuff relegated to second tier. But up until this point the C64 was still vastly outweighing it, probably mostly due to all the budget games they released, all the UK budget games. The Amiga just couldn't keep up with that kind of stuff. And if you look at this cover, it's really cool. It's obviously R-Type it's displaying here. I just love the art style. What's weird about this cover is that it's featuring a game that actually isn't reviewed in this magazine, which is kind of odd. R-Type is mapped, if you look in the bottom corner there, mapped in their play to win section, which just gives you tips and stuff and for games. So bit of a weird choice, but anyway, I still like the cover. And if you look at the top left there, there's a bunch of the main games that are reviewed, some of the highlights. You got I.O., a really good shoot 'em up by Firebird. You got The Train by Accolade. You got Grazor, which is a conversion of Contra arcade game to the C64. Grazor was the European name for Contra. And then you've got Firefly over there. That's a really good little shoot 'em up game done by the guys at Special Effects and released through Ocean. They would later go on to do Midnight Resistance, a really excellent Commodore 64 conversion of the arcade. Okay, so let's go on to the first page. Okay, so on this first page is a double spread advert for some Gremlin graphics games, great UK software company. They did some great stuff. I really like Jack the Nipper. It's one of my favorite games from them. Anyway, if you look on the left there, it's got an advert for a game called Alternate World Games. Now, this is exactly what it says it is. If you've ever played Epix's World Games, this is kind of a spoof of that. And Gremlin pull no punches. If you actually look at the top there in their advert, it says, if you played the original from Epix, you'll love this spoof from Gremlin. So you can never get away with that kind of advertising these days. People will have a heart attack over it. And Gremlin Graphics would have been sued and would have been the end of the company, but in the 80s they got away with it. They just used the Epix name to like boost their product there. Anyway, the game is like a multi-event sports game, exactly like World Games, the original, except you do really stupid events from around the world, like boot tossing and you did other stupid stuff like pillow fights, just weird stuff like that. Anyway, it's a pretty decent multi-event sports game. I kind of liked it. If you notice in the middle, it's got an 86% review from Zap64. They also seem to like it. And if you look to the right, you got an advert for Vampire's Empire, released also by Gremlin. It was made by Magic Bytes though. Those guys mainly did 16-bit stuff like Amiga and Atari ST games. I can't remember them doing many Commodore 64 stuff. Anyway, I played this. It's like an adventure game, like side-scroller on the Commodore, and it wasn't very good. Just really didn't like it. Just doesn't work very well. But The Amiga version's supposed to be pretty decent. I never got to play it, so I can't really say how good it is. Another little note, that vampire that's crawling out of the coffin, I never actually noticed this before, and I looked at this a million times as a kid, but it's got the Magic Bytes logo etched into the coffin there. I thought that's pretty cool. Never noticed that at all. I guess you look at things from an adult point of view or whatever, like many years later, and you might notice some weird things you never noticed back in the day. So I think that's a nice little touch. Okay, let's go on to the next page. Okay, so on this page, we got it on the left there, we got an advert for a game called Bedlam. It was made by Go, as far as I remember, or know at least, it is like a sub-label of US Gold. If anybody knows more about that and why they came about, just leave a comment. I'd be interested to know. But yeah, it's part of US Gold. They were around for a little while, Go anyway, and then they just fizzled out, the whole label. The quality of the games were like really sketchy at best, mostly like pretty mediocre, but there were a couple good ones in there. Anyway, Bedlam was a shoot 'em up. I don't really remember much about it. It didn't leave much of an impression on me. There is a review for it later in the magazine, so we can check it out in more details. And then on the right there, you've got the contents page. I'm not going to go through this just like any other episode of this series, because we're going to get to everything anyway, so let's just move on to the next page. Okay, so this page is a double page called The Buzz. This is basically Commodore User's up-and-coming games that are going to be released within the next few months back then. So we're going to look at a few of these here. There's quite a lot of good ones, really good games coming up. One of them was not a good game, was Road Warrior. It's not to be confused with any Mad Max movie. This is just another bad game by the company called CRL. They did a lot of dodgy stuff. Occasionally they did something decent. They had a really cool series of graphic text adventure games, like horror ones based on like Dracula, Wolfman, Jack the Ripper and stuff like that. Those are really quite excellent. I'd highly recommend checking them out if you like that genre. Road Warrior, however, is terrible. You should definitely avoid it. And above that, you got a little thing about Card Sharks. Now, I'm not even into like card games at all, but this game by Accolade was really quite excellent. It has so much personality to going for it. I just really like it. The funny thing about it, you can play against like world leaders at the time, like Ronald Reagan and Gorbachev and Margaret Thatcher, and they're all like, the characters like have little speech bubbles over their head and they keep talking and chatting amongst themselves. It gave the whole game a whole lot of personality. It's definitely way better than any card game I'd ever played on an 8-bit system. So if you like that kind of thing, I'd highly recommend checking out Card Sharks. And below that is Infiltrator 2. Now Infiltrator was a game that came out in 1986, one of my favorite Commodore 64 games ever. Infiltrator 2 though is basically just like what modern DLC is for games. It's the same game using the same engine and just slightly new missions and stuff like that, and that's pretty much what Infiltrator 2 is. Now there's nothing wrong with that. I played this one not nearly as much as the original because it's pretty much the same game. Obviously the missions are slightly different and all that, but it's not terrible by any means. It's still a good game. If you're a massive fan of Infiltrator, you definitely want to check this out. It's just more of the same. And if you look to the right at the top, it's got a thing about the Three Stooges. That's the release of the Amiga version by Cinemaware. The Amiga version for that is obviously the best. It's got great graphics and sound. You play the Three Stooges from the old 1930s and 40s movies, and you have to save an orphanage and do all these crazy mini games. It's really cool. Commodore 64 version is also pretty decent. It's definitely not as good as the Amiga version though. And the last game I just want to quickly have a look here is Judge Death in the top right there. That is based on a 2080 character in the Judge Dredd universe. This was going to be released by Piranha, but this game never got released as a 2080 game. It got cancelled, which is a real pity, so I was really looking forward to it. Although the Piranha 2080 games are so sketchy, like some of them are good, some of them are terrible. I did a video on all the 2080 games on the Commodore 64, so if you're interested, you can check that one out. Anyway, this game was eventually released, I think, a few years later. under something else, and obviously they had to modify the graphics so it didn't represent 2080 in any way. I honestly just don't remember what it was called. If anybody remembers, leave a comment please. But other than that, you know, just another game that just didn't get released as originally intended. And that's all the games I want to look at. Yeah, let's go to the next page. And here is an advert for that horrible Road Warrior game we just talked about by CRL. Now this is just weird. It's in black and white, strange for an advert. But what's even weirder is that if you're going to be advertising your game and not put any screenshots anywhere of what the actual game looks like, you know there's definitely trying to hide some things. CRL, I don't know what you're thinking. You just wasted your money on this double spread, and I'm pretty sure they didn't drum up any interest for people to check this game out based on this advert. I definitely didn't, and yeah. Next. And the buzz continues. If you look to the left there, it says Amiga virus multipliers. It's talking about a virus that was going around at the time on the Amiga. It's like could affect your disks and destroy them, destroy the data. So basically destroy your whole bootleg collection. And it says here, the original viruses reported to have emanated from a Swiss-based group of hackers calling themselves SCA, Swiss Crackers Association. Interesting. And then they give a few tips on how to protect yourself from that. And yeah, and then if you look at the bottom right, it says soundtrack jars. This is talking about the upcoming Infogrames game, Captain Blood. And how they've managed to secure the rights to use Jean-Michel Jarre music in the game and for future releases. This is pretty cool. And come to think of it now, I obviously read this in this magazine like 30 years ago or something, so that's why I remember this specifically. I thought it was pretty cool. If you don't know who Jean-Michel Jarre is, he's like kind of like a French techno kind of electronica kind of music. Anyway, they used some of his music in Captain Blood. I don't know what other games they used him in though. I can't think of anything offhand. And then at the bottom right in the corner there's an interesting little blurb. It says Hubbard move confirmed. So I never knew Rob Hubbard joined Electronic Arts and moved to the US in 1988. I thought it was a few years later. So this is pretty cool. I'll read this little bit here. As Buzz exclusively predicted in the December issue, software soundtrack supremo Rob Hubbard has now officially joined Electronic Arts team and will in the future be working solely for them. He'll be based in EA's American headquarters, but will also be working in association with the company's burgeoning British software development team on British-originated products, the first of which is projected for release in June. Okay, and here's the charts. Every magazine at the time had this. It's kind of like a rundown of what was selling well at the time on the Commodore 64 and the Amiga and a few others. We'll take a quick look at the C64 chart, just the top 5. At number 1 is Outrun, not very well deserved, it's a terrible conversion, but anyway. Platoon is 2, excellent. Number 3 is Match Day 2. Well, at least it's not Match Day 1. That is like one of the worst games I've ever played. And 4 is Combat School, great game, and so is Test Drive at number 5. And on the Amiga chart is a lot more solid. We've got Xenon, Garrison, Test Drive, and Defender of the Crown. That's a really cool selection of games. I don't know how Defender of the Crown is still in the top 5. Pretty sure it came out in 1986 or maybe early 87. Yeah, so that thing's been on the charts for years at this point. It's an excellent game, obviously. I played it on the Commodore like a madman. And another really interesting note here is that big picture there, the kamikaze, the little dude in the kamikaze thing. If you're a comic book lover, you'll probably notice the artwork is very familiar. If you look up in the top right corner there, it says Jamie Hewlett, 1988. Yes, so this is the Jamie Hewlett, the creator and artist of Tank Girl, and obviously the creator of the characters in the Gorillaz, the band. So he used to do artwork for Commodore User for a number of years. I used to love his artwork in this book. Like, it was always a highlight. I loved looking at all the little details and all that kind of stuff translated totally into Tank Girl later on. It's pretty cool. He even got his own comic book in Commodore User, and we'll check that out later. Yeah, so interesting little bit of comic book history there. Okay, and yeah, is the Commodore User's readers' votes. This is like a whole bunch of polls that they obviously got readers to vote on for the best stuff of 87. So I'm just going to look at a couple here because there's too many to look at. We want to get to those game reviews. So let's just get this going. I'll look at the best overall Commodore 64 games and Amiga games and the best films of 87, just as all voted by obviously readers. So let's check out the Commodore 64 at number 5. You got Whiz Ball. Number 4, Bubble Bobble. Such a great arcade conversion. Number 3, Defender the Crown. That sucker just sticks around. Number 2 is The Last Ninja, my favorite Commodore 64 game of all time. And number 1 is California Games, muchly deserved. Absolutely love that game. And on the Amiga front, people voted for number 5, Crazy Cars. Number 4, Star Glider 2. Number 3, Defender the Crown. Number 2, Barbarian. So this is the Psygnosis Barbarian, like an adventure kind of thing. It's not the Palace Software Versus one. And at number 1 is Garrison, which is kind of surprising. It's a pretty good game. It's basically a Gauntlet knockoff, but it's done really well. I'm kind of surprised that ended up number 1. Still, it's good. And then for films, people voted for at number 5, The Living Daylights. That's such a great Bond movie. My second favorite Bond movie of all time. License to Kill is number 1 for me still. Number 4 is Heartbreak Ridge. This is the only movie on this little list that hasn't really been very, it's kind of like just faded from people's memories as far as I'm concerned. It's not very memorable. It's an old Clint Eastwood movie. It's a decent flick. I just hadn't even thought about that movie once since watching it in probably like 87. Anyway, number 3 is Beverly Hills Cop 2, a movie that's much better than people give it credit for. Number 2 is Aliens, probably the best sequel to a movie ever made. And number 1 is Crocodile Dundee. I'm not really surprised that Crocodile Dundee's number 1. Trying to explain Crocodile Dundee to somebody nowadays and why it was so popular and funny back in the day is impossible. You just had to be there at the time. It's just a great fun movie, and everybody just connected with it, and I really enjoyed it. Anyway, let's just move on and start getting to these game reviews. Okay, we finally get to our first review. It's for the game called Firefly. This was released by Ocean and programmed by the guys at Special Effects. So Special Effects were a really cool little company. They did a lot of conversions for Ocean. They did some arcade conversions. 2 in particular that I really think are excellent are the conversions of Cable and Midnight Resistance. Those were released through Ocean, and they're really excellent versions, so special effects were pretty good. So Firefly is pretty much, if you've ever played the game Hunter's Moon, it plays similar to that. You pick this like zone on the map, and then you go in and you start blasting the hell out of everything, blow up these towers and try and like make your way through it. It had really good graphics, and the music was quite good as well. It's just overall, it's just a solid game. So they gave it an overall 8 out of 10, which is really good. And if you look there next to the Firefly name, it says CU Screen Star. If I remember correctly, that's like the award for good games, but I think it was a game that is 8 and above always got a CU Screen Star, so that did pretty well. What they had to say about it, I'll just read the last little piece here. In all, Firefly is a very polished package, and it proves that Hysteria was no one-off. So they were just referring to the game called Hysteria that was also by Special Effects. I think it came out a year earlier. That's like a side-scrolling action kind of adventure game that's also quite good. Nice graphics and sound effects again. So yeah, that was the reference there. They really liked it. I think it's quite good. It's definitely worth checking out. Okay, and here's the review for Grazor. Like I mentioned earlier, Grazor is the European name for Contra. This is a conversion of the arcade game, the original. If you never played the original, it's like a side-scrolling run-and-gun kind of game. It's known for its extreme difficulty, and this C64 version is very difficult, to say the least. It's made even harder by the fact that you have to use the spacebar to jump. So you have to hold the joystick and fire and then still use another hand to jump, which makes it even more difficult. So yeah, this game, I enjoyed it when I was a kid. I really did, even though it was crazy difficult. Overall though, I'd say it's like an average conversion. It's not a terrible one. It's not like the C64's best either. I think it's somewhere in the middle. I mean, they gave it overall 7 out of 10, which is, yeah, above normal. So I think we're kind of on the same page for the review anyway. It's definitely much better than Ocean's Rastan Saga conversion, which is awful as far as I'm concerned, except obviously the music. So what they had to say about it, I'll just read it out here. The graphics and sound could certainly have been better, but I must own up to deriving some perverse gratification from playing it. So if you're a masochist, this is right up your street. Everyone else ought to think twice before splashing out. I think that pretty much sums it up. It is a super difficult game. It's going to frustrate the hell out of you if you play it. Otherwise, you know, it's Contra. If you know this game, then this is the C64 version, and it's a decent go at it. Okay, so on the left we got a review for Traz by Cascade. This is another in a long line of breakout Arkanoid type games that came out during this period. There was just so many of them. Was like a massive trend at the time. Thank you, Arkanoid. This one, I played it back in the day. I don't remember anything specific about it. It has like cool power-ups and stuff, but it's your usual thing. You know, they gave it 7 out of 10, which is good. If you like those kinds of games, it's probably worth checking out. I just can't really remember anything specific about it. On your right though, you got an advert for Power at Sea, the game made by Accolade. I feel this is a super underrated game. You take control of a massive aircraft carrier in World War II and you go blow up some Japanese islands and stuff. It is very cool. It's typical Accolade. It's a simulation game but also an action game, and it's very easy to get into. If you've never played this one, I'd highly recommend it. It's got excellent graphics as well. Okay, and we got a double dose here of Accolade games. So on the left you got 4th and Inches. This is an American football game. This was programmed by Bob Whitehead. He was one of the founders of Accolade. This is his second game. His first one was Hardball. This game plays very much like Hardball, even though it's a different sport. It's got the same menus, the way you select plays and all that kind of stuff, so it works very much the same. This is one of the few American football games I was actually able to understand, because I mean, we didn't get this sport where I used to live, so it's like completely foreign to me, but I was able to understand it. They gave it 5. I think it deserves a lot more than that. I think that's a bit harsh. The reason why they gave it 5 is they said it feels a little bit like automatic, the game. You select plays and animations happen and then you take control of it for a few seconds and then it's back to the strategy. But I mean, that is the game and I think it works quite well. I don't think it deserves 5. It should have got a little bit more than that. It's a solid 7, I would say. Anyway, on to the right, you got The Train. This is another advert for another Accolade game. Accolade really splashed out on the cash this month, and The Train's an excellent game. This is another one where, you know, standard Accolade fare, where it's a simulation as much as an action game. It's a bit of both, and I love this game. It's one of my favorites. I did a rapid fire review on it, so you can check that out if you want more info on it. It's basically a train simulator, and you got to escape to Normandy out of German territory, and it's just great. It's got action sequences. The train simulation aspect is really cool. The graphics are excellent. Highly recommended game. Okay, next we got a game called I.O. Me and my friend always used to debate whether this game was called I.O. or 10 until we found this review. So as far as I know, I.O. stands for Into Oblivion. It doesn't mention it anywhere in this review. I remember reading that once somewhere, that's what it meant. I never knew what it meant when I was a kid. I was just like, I.O., that was it. This game was released by Firebird. It's a side-scrolling shoot 'em up. It is very nice. It's got really good graphics. The gameplay, it feels really good. I really enjoyed this. It's got 4 levels. I've never managed to finish this game back in the day or now. The furthest I've ever got is level 3, so I've never actually seen the final level, whatever that looks like, but it's a really good game. It is very difficult though, so be prepared. Like most C64 shoot 'em ups, it's a tough one. And this game obviously got a CU screen star because it got an 8 out of 10, and it's definitely well worth playing if you like shoot 'em ups. Okay, and the shoot 'em up face continues here. On the left you got a game called Task 3. That was released by Databot. This was, I remember playing this. It didn't leave much of an impression on me. It's an okay game. What I liked about it was that you could fly up the screen, and whenever you want, you can just pull back, and you can actually fly backwards. So you're not being like forced up the screen. So it had a little bit of like, kind of like Iridium or something like that. The shoot 'em up action was kind of fun. This game was more based on score, if I remember. It gives you this like description of how well you do when you die, so you can see how much better you're getting. It's one of those types of games. They gave it an overall 7. They said it's a decent game. It might not be for everybody though. And then on the right you got Morpheus. I don't know if I ever played this game. I honestly don't think I did. I think I just looked at this advert about 700 times and looked at those screenshots, but I've never actually played it. I don't think I have anyway. It's been a long time. I know this game was made by Andrew Braybrook, so that obviously piqued my interest. Obviously the guy that made Iridium and a whole bunch of other great games. If anybody's ever played this and has any suggestions whether it's good or not, let me know in the comments. It'll be awesome. So we got another game by Accolade. This is Apollo 18. This is just a fantastic game. I played this so much back in the day. It was just so much fun. This follows the traditional standard of Accolade games, like I've mentioned multiple times here. It's a simulation and it's kind of like a bit of an arcade action game. You got to actually land on the moon. It's kind of like a moon simulator. It's basically taking place after the original landing. It's like you're going back to the moon. And yeah, you got to like start off in Houston, you got to take off, you orbit, you got to like fix satellites, you got to land on the moon, you got to do a moonwalk, you got to still make it back to Earth. It's epic. It's such a good game. The graphics and sound are excellent. I'll tell you what they just said here at the end. A highly entertaining piece of software which I really liked. Not only original but enjoyable too. Definitely one for all you budding Kirks out there. I like the little Star Trek reference as well. Okay, and here's that game, Bedlam. We saw it right at the beginning of the mag, the advert. It's made by Go, which is a sub-label, or was a sub-label of US Gold. And this is another shoot 'em up. Another one. This is a vertically scrolling shoot 'em up. This game was, it's fun. There's nothing dramatically great about it. The one unique thing though I remember is the bonus stages were like super weird. You go inside a pinball machine, so like you're in space and you're just shooting up stuff as per usual, and then you go into these bonus stages where you're inside a pinball machine. You got to shoot the ball to make it bounce everywhere. It's a weird concept. I don't know where that comes from. I don't know what they were thinking, or if they were thinking, but yeah, it's kind of interesting. If you want to check that out, check it out at least just for the bonus stages. 7 out of 10. And if you look to the right, you got the Mirrorsoft release of Tetris. So this game obviously is available on every system under the sun, and I just love this. If you look at the bottom there, it tells you what systems it's available for on at least just computer format. You got available for Commodore 64, 128 tape and disc, Spectrum tape and disc, Amstrad CPC tape and disc, Amstrad PCW tape and disc, BBC Electron tape and disc, MSX tape, Atari ST disc, Amiga disc, IBM PC and compatibles. That's just the old computer stuff. That's not even getting into console stuff, which came a little bit later. Pity the poor dude that made this got 0 royalties from it. And here we got a review for Firebird's Black Lamp. This is a game that I had as a bootleg on one of my discs. I used to load it up all the time. It's a pretty fun little action-adventure game. You have to go around and collect all these lamps. They have magical powers. Well, I assume. I never really knew the story. You collect them and you gotta fight dudes and you fight dragons and all this kind of stuff. It's a fun game. It's pretty difficult though. The graphics are really nice, the music is really good as well. I was just reading here, I didn't actually realize this, but this is actually a port of an Atari ST game. Maybe that's why it's got like its unique look to it, but it definitely looks a little bit different than the usual C64 kind of style of graphics. Anyway, Black Lamp, it's a pretty hard game though, it's not easy. It's pretty fun if you're looking for an adventure game to mess around with. And here we got, on the left, we got an advert for Octopolis. This is made by English Software. I'm pretty sure those are the guys that made Night Games. I'm not 100%, but I'm pretty sure that was them. I barely remember this game. Now, this is what's so cool about going through these old magazines, is that there's certain games that just don't get mentioned ever, or you just can't even find information about them. Octopolis, I'm not saying it's super obscure or anything. Wow, I just couldn't even remember this game until I looked at it now in this magazine. It's, I haven't played this one since, probably about 1988. I remember it being a little bit like Sanxion, and I actually really want to go back and play this now that I've been looking at it. It got a CNVG hit, that's Computer and Video Games, that old magazine, and also Zap 64, the rating, they gave it 86% in the advert there. So yeah, I'm gonna go back and check that one out. And on the right, you got a review for Dan Dare 2 by Virgin Games. Dan Dare the original is such an excellent adventure game. I just absolutely love it. I think it's one of the best on the C64. Dan Dare 2 is a completely different game. I've done I did a whole video on the complete Dan Dare series, so you can check that out on the C64 if you're interested. Anyway, this one is completely different. A maze shoot 'em up. You can choose between if you want to be Dan Dare or the Mekon, who's the main bad guy, so you can actually switch roles. You got to go around and kill the Mekon's clones and fight as bad guys in these little rocket ship thing. Anyway, it's pretty cool. It's definitely not anything like the first one, so that can be kind of disappointing for a lot of people, but I kind of like the fact that they just ignored the original and they just made another game. And then the third one in the series is also a different take on it. It's a different genre, so all three of the games are in different genres, which I think is pretty cool. I still think the original is the best, but this one is quite fun. I'll just read what they had to say here at the end. Dan Dare 2 is a very enjoyable game indeed, and nor is it another dose of the original, which is a good thing. Though half of me wishes it was, because the first one has to be held as one of the best arcade adventures on the C64. I agree with that. The sequel is a more straightforward challenge, but still enjoyable. And they gave it 7 out of 10, which is pretty good. I would definitely suggest checking it out. The original is, obviously better, in my opinion, but this is a fun little side adventure in the Dan Dare universe. So on the left you got a really cool advert for Platoon by Ocean. This is obviously an adaptation of the 1986 movie by Oliver Stone. Very cool movie, and the game is quite excellent. I absolutely love it. It's got all different multiple genres of gameplay in there, even first person where you're going through the tunnels, and it's got side scroller kind of levels, and then these kind of contra kind of behind the dude as you shoot up guys. It's very cool. Nice game, good graphics, and excellent Jonathan Dunn music as well. And on the right you got a review for Brave Star. This was released by Go, another one, but it was actually programmed by Probe. Those guys went on to become a legendary company, making awesome games like Alien 3 on the Mega Drive and Die Hard Trilogy on the PS1 and Saturn. Just love those games. So this was based on the cartoon series Brave Star. Very cool series. I used to watch this every Saturday morning. It was awesome. It was made by the guys that made He-Man. This was supposed to be their follow-up to He-Man. It didn't really catch on the same way, so it kind of fizzled out. Unfortunately, it was quite a cool cartoon. I remember the bad guy in it, Tex Hex, was one of the most creepy bad guys I'd ever seen. Scared the hell out of me. Anyway, so this game is pretty cool. It's like a side scroller and you go and blast up stuff. Got to rescue a whole lot of people from Tex Hex. It's kind of a combination of two games. It's got more of a run and gun kind of feel, and then when you go into buildings you can go and talk to people, and it turns into an adventure game. So it's kind of a combination. I think it's quite good if you can figure out how to play it. It's pretty cool, and they gave it an overall 8, which is a pretty good rating. And next we got a review for Intrigue. This is an excellent game. I did a rapid fire review for this one as well. I absolutely love it. I think it's one of the C64's best adventure games. This was released by Spectrum Holobyte. The game is kind of like a noir kind of detective game. You're trying to find these terrorists that have planted a bomb in Washington DC, and there's a whole bunch of other subplots happening. The cool thing about this game is that the plots can just kind of spawn out of anything, so every time you play it, it's completely different. Characters you meet can act differently towards you. The way you talk to them can change the plot drastically. Being a male or female character changes the whole tone of the game. It's just such a well done game. It just blows away most other kind of detective games on the system. It's excellent, and I love the black and white style graphics. Gives that old kind of 1930s and 40s film noir kind of look. It's excellent. I'll just read what they had to say right at the end. They gave it an overall 9, which is brilliant, and I don't see a screen star here, which is another weird thing. What's up with that? Do they just put that on anything and just... I don't understand their screen star badge thing anymore. Maybe I'm missing something. Anyway, so what they had to say at the end here is, with its multiple character option, male and female interaction, and apparently 2,000 plus possible solutions, the game kicks the stuffing out of any upstart tech adventure within spitting distance. a classic. Agree 100%. This game is just brilliant. Okay, so on the left you got Sidearms, a review for Sidearms. This is a conversion of the arcade game by Capcom. The arcade game was, by Capcom standards, a pretty average game. It's definitely not one of their classics. I never really gravitated towards it in the arcade. I played it a few times and I was just like, whatever. But this conversion is absolutely garbage. It's by Go again. So they did a few good games in this magazine so far, but this is definitely one of the ones that gave the label a bad name. This is a terrible conversion. Me having to go back and capture the footage for that you've seen there right now and replaying this is just, it was terrible. It's awful game. The sound is horrible. The music is terrible. It's slow. It's boring. The enemy patterns are just repetitive as hell. They gave it an overall 2, which is just pathetic to put it mildly. Yeah, so this is definitely one of those games that added to Go's demise. I would say this, and probably Laser Tag, that piece of garbage also. But anyway, so yeah, just avoid Sidearms. Just go play the arcade. Just go play that. And anyway, on the right you got an advert for Black Lamp. Very cool advert there. We already looked at this game a little bit earlier, so let's just move on. And here's a double page spread for The Train by Accolade. Another Accolade game. Hey look, see you Screen Star, The Return. It got 8 out of 10. So yep, looks like they just randomly throw those things out. I've covered this game many times. I don't want to repeat myself too much here, so I'm going to go through this pretty quick. If you've never played The Train, it's a train simulator and it's an action game. It's typical Accolade. You can think of it as Ace of Aces on a train. So that pretty much describes it, I think. I've done a rapid fire review for this, so you can check that out. And it's also in my Accolade documentary. If you've never played this game though, seriously, you need to play it. It's just fantastic all around. Okay, you just got a competition on the left there and a few little adverts for some repairs, Commodore 64 repairs. Let's move on. And on the left, we got a review for BMX Kids. Now this is what you call a budget game. If you look up top in the left, it says £1.99 and it was released by Firebird. So Firebird, Mastertronic, and I would say probably Codemasters were the kings of the budget games back in the day. Now if you don't know what budget games are, it's kind of a bit of a unique thing to kind of 8-bit European computers. A lot of the big companies made their big games and they also made budget games. They were like separate games made specifically to cater to people that were cheap. So, and the games were obviously downgraded versions of big games. They were like smaller and like more intimate and quicker, and you could finish them quickly, and sometimes they turned out to be better than the big full price games, and sometimes they were just garbage, just like what you would expect. So you never really knew what you were going to get with a budget game. It's a decent little game. It's nothing to write home about. It's fun for a while. The best part about the game is the Rob Hubbard soundtrack, which is absolutely rocking. Overall though, they said it's a pretty decent little game. They said you can finish it or master it in like, a day. So that's about it. You're not going to get anything more out of it. But they said for the price, it's not that bad. So it got 6, which is like, it's okay. And a couple adverts there. Nothing to really look at. Next. On the left, you got a review for Mandroid. This is a sequel to, I think, a game that came out about a year, maybe 2 earlier on the 64 called Cyborg, both released by CRL. So this game's kind of garbage, to be honest. I never understood what the goal of the game was. Constantly get attacked by people. It's so monotonous. You're just blasting things, and it's just, you don't know what to do. You just aimlessly wander around, walking into places. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this. This is another CRL game that is pretty bad, and anyway they gave it an overall 5, which is not good. And another thing about this game is that you only get 1 life, so when you die you have to start the whole game all over again, which is ridiculous. So anyway, just skip it. And we got a double page spread here for Strike Fleet by Electronic Arts. This is one of these big old naval simulators, like a big strategy game / simulator. EA and probably Microprose were the best at these kind of games on the C64, I feel anyway. And this is another one that doesn't disappoint. It's pretty damn good. You got to control like a fleet of ships. It takes place in like modern era. Usually these things are always like some sort of World War II simulator. Modern era, modern 80s era anyway, and it has all the usual hotspots that were causing mischief at the time, like the Persian Gulf and stuff like that. So this game relies a lot on strategy and micromanagement, so if you're not into that kind of thing, it might put you off a bit. It has a steep learning curve also, but once you get around that, it's actually pretty damn good. It's a really well-made game. Overall, they gave it a 7. The reason they gave it 7 is because they said it's not going to appeal to everybody, and I agree. So if you like this style of game, then give it a shot. And yeah, we got on the right a review for Ricochet. This is yet another one of these Arkanoid Breakout clones. So this is by Firebird. This is on their budget label though, so this game was only £2. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I sort of remember Firebird's budget label to be Silverbird. I'm pretty sure that's correct. Anyway, if anybody remembers, just leave a comment. As far as the game goes, there's nothing really to say. Yeah, this is just an Arkanoid clone, and not nearly anywhere as good as that, but it was super cheap. But what they had to say at the end, yeah, I'll just read it quickly. Incomparable with Arkanoid in nearly every way, Ricochet still offers a lot for £2. Cheap for a game with so much balls. Yeah, some real great journalistic writing there. Thanks, Commodore User. Okay, so on the left we've got an advert for Outrun. This is the conversions to all 8 and 16-bit computer systems anyway. Outrun has suffered some really terrible conversions, especially the originals. I don't think they could ever get it right, either on 8 or 16-bit until consoles came along, like 16-bit consoles. But yeah, the Amiga version is horrible, the Commodore 64 version is terrible, and I know all the other Spectrum and Amstrad, I'm pretty sure they were terrible as well. Even the 8-bit Sega Master System version is mediocre. Outrun was just not meant to be converted to 8-bit. I'm sure somebody could get it right if they retried it now, but yeah, you should just avoid Outrun at all costs on those systems. And on the right, you got a review for Star Fox 2 by Electronic Arts, obviously a sequel to Star Fox. And so this is a spaceship simulator / shoot 'em up kind of game. So this one, I played the first one, I really liked it, but this one I never got into because I had a bootleg back in the day and I could just never get a grip on the controls or what the heck was going on. So I don't really have a proper opinion on this. If anybody wants to chime in, leave some comments, what they think of Star Fox 2. I'll just read what they had to say at the end here just to sum it up. Flawlessly presented and handsomely packaged, Star Fox 2 suffers from an excess of realism and lack of fun. It's more likely to appeal to fans of flight simulators than shoot 'em up brigade. And even the former might tire eventually of playing dodgems with yet another load of floating rocks. So they gave it a 6 overall, which is average at best. And on this page we've got 3 quick reviews for a whole lot of mediocrity here. I'm guessing that's why they gave them a small amount of page space. At the top we got a Codemasters release, a budget game, ATV simulator. Codemasters used to put the word simulator on the end of anything just to like sell it. Like they had a Fruit Machine Simulator and Grand Prix Simulator and about a billion other simulators. Below that it's Thundercross by CRL. Never actually played it. It got 6, so it's CRL, so it sounds like it's business as usual for their trashy products. And at the bottom you got Code Hunter. This is by Firebird. This is another budget game, £1.99. This is another game I've never played before, I've never even heard of it. It got an overall 8, so I might have to look into that. Alright, you got an advert for Rival Magazine Computer and Video Games. Next, got a poster for R-Type, pretty cool. Next, and back to some more games. So on the left we got an advert for 2 ocean games. We got Grazor, which we looked at earlier, and below that you got Combat School. These are both conversions of Konami arcade games. If you lived in North America, Combat School is called Boot Camp. Combat School is by far the best out of both of them though. It's excellent. It's an excellent multi-event sports game. I featured in my C64 top 10 of multi-event games, so you can check that out if you want some more info. I love it. And then on the right you got a review for Night Games 2 by English Software. So this is a weird game. It's supposed to be a sequel to the original Night Games, the one where you like a versus game. So this one is nothing like that at all. It's like basically variations on a shoot 'em up game, and it's just weird. I don't know what they were thinking with this. It's just strange. It's not a sequel in any way besides the name. You know, I thought this game was okay when I played it. It's definitely not something I would recommend. They gave it an overall 4, which pretty much sums it up. So, yeah, just go play the original instead. Okay, so on the left, you got the cheapo roundup. These are all the budget games that they just didn't have space to put in, so they've done like really like small little mini reviews. This is also full of games that are just re-releases, like 1984's Ghostbusters and the Judge Dredd game from I think 1985. That's what that is. Nothing too exciting over there. Ghostbusters is obviously excellent, and they also got a one for Zybex there, which is a pretty underrated shoot 'em up, although the ridiculous difficulty of that game kind of hampers it a bit. Anyway, on the right you got an advert for Chernobyl. Yes, they made a game out of that by Cosme. This was done by Paul Norman. It's a nuclear power plant simulator. Yeah, wrap your head around that one. I did a mini documentary on Paul Norman, so if you want to find out more about the man behind the game, he also did obviously Forbidden Forest and Caverns of Kafka and a whole lot of other great games for Cosme, so go check that one out if you want to see more about him. And on the left we got a review for Road Wars. This is an Amiga game, but Commodore User seem to have screwed up here. They don't even mention anywhere that this is an Amiga review. Usually they have it in the rest of the reviews. They actually have, like, it says Amiga, so yeah, somebody, a bit of sloppiness there again by Commodore User. Anyway, this is a pretty fun game. It's got really good graphics and sound. I've had quite a bit of fun playing it over the years, but it's definitely limited. That's mostly what they say as well. That's why they gave it 6. You know, you're going to be playing it, like playing this for 5 minutes is really fun, maybe 10 minutes at the most, but after that, you know, it's just the same thing all the time. And on the right you got an advert for Top Fuel Challenge. This is released by US Gold. It's another Cosme game. It's a drag racing simulator. I never really enjoyed this game, honestly, back in the day. I thought it was just like boring. But anyway, let's move on. So on the left, we've got an advert for Gauntlet and Gauntlet 2 Limited Edition. So I never actually saw this ever, like the physical version of this big box you see at the bottom there, any store shelves or anything. So I'm curious as to how limited this edition was. I'm assuming it was pretty limited. If anybody knows what it actually came with, it doesn't say anything here. It just talks about the games a bit. I'm assuming going by limited editions back then, which were almost non-existent, you probably just got the games. But if anybody had this or has it, and let us know if there's anything else weird inside there. And on the right you got a review for an Amiga game called Ball Raider. Very unfortunate name. This is yet another one of these breakout Arkanoid clones. Like I said, they were just flooding the market at the time just because of Arkanoid. This one is a very generically average one, I would say. I've played this before. I really like the good old science fiction type graphics they have in the background. They look really cool, and the music's pretty decent as well. But besides that, this is just standard generic ball breaking kind of action. So they also say that this game is definitely for diehards. Everybody else should just move on. So that's why it got a 5 out of 10. I would probably give it a little bit more than that. It's not a bad game, it's just very, very generic. And the Amiga reviews continue. As on the right you can see Time Bandit there. This is kind of a bit of a Gauntlet clone. It's a little bit more than that, but it's quite a cool little game. I think it's definitely worth checking out. No real unique features besides the fact that when you play in 2-player mode, the screen actually splits and you guys can go off on your own things, so you're not like forced to be on the same screen at once, which is kind of cool. This was a conversion of an Atari ST game also. The graphics and sound and that are all decent, you know, nothing to write home about. But if you're gonna go for a Gauntlet clone, and you should definitely just go and play Rainbow Arts' Garrison instead. It's a great game on Amiga and the C64. I played the C64 version like crazy. Those are definitely great Gauntlet clones, but this is pretty decent. Worth checking out if you like this style of game. Okay, so on the left you've got an advert for Scruples. This is a conversion of the Milton Bradley board game. It was very, very popular during the 80s. Anyway, not too much to say there, it's just a conversion of a board game. And on the right you got a review for Mercenary on the Amiga. This game came out on the C64, I think probably about a year or two earlier, and it was done by Paul Wokes, the guy that did the really cool game Encounter, which is also excellent. Check that out. So I had a bootleg of this game on my C64, so I never really knew what the objective was. I just used to fly around and you can go in underground tunnels and search things, and I just blast everything. So I never knew what the actual goal of the game was. So I've never played the Amiga version. It's supposed to be even better, much faster, and obviously better in terms of graphics. It got an overall 8, which they gave a CU Screen Star. So they really, really liked it. They said the combination of exploration, minor puzzle solving, blasting action, and just the way that the game is pretty much an open world game. There's very few restrictions. You can go and do whatever you want, like any location. Definitely a game worth checking out. I can only recommend the C64 version, as that's the only one I've ever played. But this one, it's supposed to be better. And so with all the jokes about breakout games, we finally get a review of the Amiga version of Arkanoid. So this one was done by Discovery Software. It wasn't done by Imagine, like the Commodore 64 version. And anyway, overall they say this is really quite excellent, besides the fact, as you can see over there, it's got a £49 price tag, which is insane for 1988. I don't even know how they could justify that. It's crazy. So what they had to say here is, the one thing you don't have on it is an affordable price. You have to have money to burn on it, an obscene amount of money. It's also not easy to come by. Meanwhile, C64 owners can revel in the fact that they possess a game that is as good as the Amiga version and nearly a quarter of the price. And overall it got a 7. I'm not sure where they came up with the 7. All the bars are like 8s and 9s, so I don't know what's going on there, but you know, Commodore User, they just dash it out whatever they feel. And on the left, we've got another Amiga review. This is for Terramax. This was made by Grand Slam, which was a pretty prolific 16-bit company back then. Don't know what ever happened to them. They just kind of disappeared. Anyway, this is like a side-scrolling platform adventure game with puzzle elements. I've never actually played this game, so I can't really say anything about it. They said it's quite fun. It's a little bit too difficult though, brings it down a little bit. They say it's got a really awesome Ben Daglish soundtrack. Overall though, it got a 6. The reason they gave it a 6 is they said it's just pretty difficult, so it brings it down a bit. And if you look to the right, there's advert for some more Go stuff. And like I said, 50-50 with these guys. There's 2 really good games on here. Trantor, The Last Stormtrooper in the top right. That game was made by Probe, as far as I remember. Even though it looks like a Spectrum game, it's still pretty cool. And the bottom left there, you got Brave Star, which we looked at earlier, which I really like. And then you got 2 other pieces of garbage. You got Sidearms, which is terrible. The top left, Laser Tag, which is such a bad idea for a game. It's basically an exploitation game trying to cash in on the laser tag craze that was going on in the 80s, but to make it into a game is just stupid. Anyway, it's garbage, so you should avoid that as well. Okay, so we got a double page spread here, review for Golden Path by Firebird. It's another Amiga game. This is like an adventure game. You go around kind of like King's Quest-y kind of deal, you know, you finding objects and trying to solve puzzles and that kind of stuff. The graphics are really nice in this game. It's got a bit of action element also. You can do a bit of kung fu, obviously. Music is really good. Overall, they say it's a pretty good adventure game. They say might be a little bit easy for some veterans, but definitely an adventure game that's worth checking out. And on the left, we've got a big advert for 4th and Inches. That's the one we looked at earlier by Accolade. Pretty good game. And on the right, we got the beginnings of Into the Valley. This is Commodore User's kind of text adventure or graphic text adventure section where they would like review those kinds of games. The second page, you can see a whole bunch of reviews for a bunch of stuff. You got Federation, Beneath Folly, Quest for the Golden Egg Cup. That's the only one out of those I've actually played. I really enjoyed this genre. It was really unique. It died out in the late 80s, early 90s completely. And it hasn't really ever made a comeback, although people still make games of this style, which is awesome. And on the third page here of Into the Valley was my section that I used to look at all the time. It's called Adventure Clues in the middle there. Like this one, for example, has got a clue for Frankenstein, a game that I played a lot. It says cut the stone wolf's throat, like example like that. They used to give clues just to help you out with certain puzzles, and I found this section to be extremely useful. I got past many a puzzle that had completely bamboozled me, so this was pretty cool. And this is the letter section. This is just the part of the book, like all the other magazines, where people write in and think they have great opinions on everything, and everything that the reviewers have said is complete garbage, and they complained, like most of these letters about people complaining about reviews for games. Your usual, nothing's much changed in like 30 years. Okay, so you just got a couple adverts there, and on this page is the start of the play to win section. This is just giving you maps, tips, and sometimes cheats to how to complete games. This is the actual one that I used to complete Platoon. It's got the map at the top for the forest, which is very useful, and the underground tunnels. And over here on the right, you got some pokes. Those are like kind of cheats you can put in before you load up your game. You type in all this text and it'll give you like infinite lives or whatever, you know, some sort of cheat. And here's what the cover of the magazine was boasting about. This is the R-Type map. It gives tons of useful tips on how to survive this game from all different levels. Then over on this page you got level 5 to 8, and on the left you got an advert for Rolling Thunder. That is an arcade game made by Namco. This is the conversion done by US Gold. The C64 version unfortunately is kind of rubbish. I would describe it as chunky and clunky. You definitely do not want to play it, rather just go play the arcade instead. And speaking of arcades, if you look on both these pages, it's an arcade fest. So on the left you got Data East Arcade Alley. This is a compilation. I love these things. This one had 6 Commodore 64 games compilation. This was released by US Gold. They're all based on obviously Data East arcade games. Kung Fu Master, Express Raider, Breakthrough, Tag Team Wrestling, Karate Champ, and Last Mission. That is such a good lineup. Well, if you ignore Breakthrough, which is an abysmal conversion, but the arcade game wasn't that good anyway, so if you ignore that, it's just fantastic stuff. Look out for that in a future episode of Compilation Nation. I'll definitely be covering that compilation. I actually have it. I bought it back in the 80s. I still have it with me. And on the right, you've actually got the start of the arcade section. You had a small little section in Commodore User based on arcade games, new ones that were coming out. 99% of these games ended up being converted to either the C64 or Amiga at the time, so it made logical sense to highlight them, and it was awesome to see all the arcades anyway, because arcade gaming was massive back then. So this is obviously a review for Shinobi. Got an overall 8. Don't know what else can really be said about Shinobi. It's just an excellent Sega arcade game, side-scrolling action goodness. Spawned a whole series of great Shinobi games right across to the Mega Drive and beyond. If you've never played Shinobi, there's a really excellent Sega Ages re-release of it on the Switch currently, so you can check that out. It's arcade perfect. And the arcade coverage continues. This is a full double page review for Thunderblade, the Sega arcade game. I was lucky enough to play this full cabinet version, the one you see in the top right there, back in the day, and it was absolutely amazing. The whole seat like shifted sideways just like it would in a helicopter, and like the control felt so cool. Playing that on its original form was just absolutely awesome. I just loved it. This game is often described as just Afterburner in a helicopter, but it's really not. It's way more than that. The top-down kind of blasting action is super cool, and then it goes into the Afterburner style thing, but it plays completely differently. And yeah, it's just a great game. It's just great arcade gaming. They gave it an overall 9 out of 10, so they absolutely loved it, and I agree. Okay, so on the left you got an advert for Impossible Mission 2, the sequel to obviously Impossible Mission by Epix. I just love this advert. I think it's the best one. I've actually got the cassette version of this game, and it has that cover. I love it. It's the best cover for the game, and there's a lot of weird, stupid ones out there. I know, even though the main guy doesn't actually have a gun in the game, and he's obviously facing off against Elvin at the end. You can see Elvin in his sunglasses, just like what happens at the end of the game. Spoiler alert. It just looks freaking cool. This is a super underrated sequel to a classic game. I don't know why people don't like this that much. It builds on everything that made the original great and adds all these cool new features, like using the bombs to blow holes in the ground and you can jump through them, and it's just very cool. Tons of like little extras. It's a really well made game if you've never played it. And on the right you got the arcade section continues. You got 2 previews at the top there, one for Guerrilla War and one for Super Contra. Super Contra by Konami. I really didn't like that arcade game. It is so ridiculously difficult. It's just not even fun to play at all. I still don't like it. I played it recently. There's something about that game, it just doesn't work for me. Guerrilla War though, that was a really fun arcade game, especially in 2-player. It's basically a variation on Akari Warriors. The graphics are just bigger and more bolder. It's pretty cool. I think Akari Warriors is better, but Guerrilla War is good. Don't ever play the C64 version though. It's complete garbage, trust me. And on the bottom right there, you can see it says Sonic Sega, which is pretty hilarious because this was 1988 and Sonic the Hedgehog hadn't been created yet. He would only come along in like 1991. But anyway, this is for a Sega arcade game called Sonic Boom, which is also funny. Something that's associated with Sonic the Hedgehog as well. Anyway, this is a super generic shoot 'em up, a vertically scrolling shoot 'em up. I played this and I barely even remember it. I only remember it when I was looking at this magazine. Completely forgettable game. If you put Sega in front of something with an arcade, it's just arcade gold, which is 99% of the time. But Sonic Boom is just a completely forgettable shoot 'em up. So this double page spread is just for competition results, so you can read who won, whatever was happening in the last few months. I do like that drawing in the bottom left corner there. It's called Edzilla. It's the editor of CU, Commodore User, and he's destroying Zap Tower there. He's picking it up and smashing it, kind of Rampage style. You can see some of the Zap reviewers running away there. You can see Julian Rignall in the middle there. It's hilarious. It's really well made. And let's go to the next page. This is just an advert for Action Replay cartridge. This is just another advert just for stuff. This is more advertising and what's coming next month. No point in looking at that. And we finally got to that comic book I was talking about. This is Groovy Arcade Stories. This is by Jamie Hewlett. This is his regular little comic book he eventually ended up getting in Commodore User, which is pretty awesome. If you just look at the art style, even the writing and everything about it is so Tank Girl and later on Gorillas. It's really cool looking at this now to see where the style started from. The detail on the drawings is just excellent. I just loved it. I loved looking over it and just looking at all the little details, just like you do in Tank Girl, slogans or stickers on people's shirts and that. There's so many references, it's ridiculous. So I don't know how long he was actually there, but he did a lot of stuff for Commodore User over the years. And there's just some more adverts. Let's skip past that. And yeah, we're on to Tommy's Tips. Now this is just a kind of a help section for people that are programming and people that are trying to do troubleshooting for things that don't work or issues around other things. So this section for me as a kid was obviously the most boring part of the magazine, but looking at it now, it's actually got a lot of cool, useful information, cool stuff that I could have actually used back then and just tried out some things, but too busy playing games. But this section here actually reminds me a lot of what the US or American magazines, Commodore magazines used to be like. 90% of them were just Tommy's Tips, the whole magazine, and they were very, very boring to read. There was such a massive difference between the UK Commodore magazines and the US ones. It was night and day. The UK ones, which is Commodore User, was one of them. It's just jam-packed with games and awesome adverts, and it's just stuff that you want to go over. And the US ones were just full of stuff like Tommy's Tips. So as a kid, it was just super, super dull to read. And then on this last page, you can look to the left, you got some girl modeling a Commodore User t-shirt that you could buy. Probably just somebody from the staff. The shirt she's wearing is 1,000 times too big for her, but I guess that was the style. And on the right, you got an advert for Arkanoid Revenge of Doe. That's obviously the sequel to the regular Arkanoid. I love the fact for this advert, they didn't even bother to do any artwork for it. They just literally a screenshot of the arcade title page. If you look just below the A and the N in the middle there, you can actually see the score sticking through just a little bit on the sides. It looks okay, I guess. It's no Bob Wakelin classic, that's for sure. And then finally, onto the back page. We have finally made it through. Anybody that's still watching, congratulations. And we got an advert for Bad Cat. This is a bizarro game released by Rainbow Arts. So this is a weird game. This is a cat, and you're kind of doing your own Olympic Games multi-event kind of deal, but you're doing weird alley cat kind of stuff. It's really bizarre. I played this quite a bit back in the day, and I kind of enjoyed it. It's definitely weird. You do this weird bowling game and a bar, bouncing this trampoline thing to hit these circles and squares and triangles. It's really weird. I can't even explain it. You also run through a neighborhood, try to avoid stuff, kind of variations on the Olympic Games kind of deals that you got with all the other multi-event sports games, but with a cat with an attitude. And finally, that brings this whole magazine to an end. And thanks for joining me, Bastish B, at 64K. I hope you had a good time. You can check me out on all social media over there. I've got a lot of extra content on all those things. If you can like and subscribe also, it'll be greatly appreciated, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.